So I'm pleased to say I'm joined by Managing Director of the GBGB, Mark Bird. Thank you for talking to us today. I wanted to start by asking you about your background, your professional background, because it was quite an unusual start to a career here, really. Yeah. Tell us how that's benefited you here.
Well, I spent 30 years as a career cop, working in Essex and then more recently in London. Finished up at the tender age of 48 and decided what I was going to do next. A job within the Greyhound Board, Director of Regulation, was advertised. I looked into it. I think my one foray into Greyhound racing up to that point had been going to Romford, because I used to be based out in the east end of London, getting food poisoning, sitting on a railway platform going home, not having any alcohol whatsoever, and just being sick. And that was my one foray into Greyhound racing up until when I joined the Greyhound Board. Tom Kelly was the chairman at the time. He, for some bizarre reason, wanted to recruit me as the Director of Regulation, so that happened back in 2015. And then more latterly, in the last 2 years, I've been obviously Managing Director. So it's not the usual career path, I'm sure, but equally it's one that I've relished and will continue to relish in the challenge that I've got. And
were there skills from that part of your career that have benefited you here?
Yeah, dealing with difficult people, probably, negotiating, communication. There's a whole raft of things. You wouldn't necessarily put them together as bedfellows, but it seems to have worked in terms of where I am now.
So you didn't have a lot of experience of actually going greyhound racing?
No, not at all. I mean, I think as a young lad, I'd had a Saturday job in Ipswich when I was going through sixth form. And I can remember the DIY store that I went to every week was the ex-Greyhound track at Ipswich. So. But I've never been involved with it. My family have got no connections with it whatsoever. Having said that, in the short time that I've been here, 4 years, I can honestly say it's got under my skin.
Were you an animal lover?
Always been dogs. I've always had dogs in the family. We had 2 dogs anyway, and of course we've now added Baz to that as well as in terms of being a retired greyhound. But yeah, always normally working dogs as well, if I'm honest. So.
What about you as a person outside of work? What do you like doing?
Travelling to and from work is normally part of my highlights, and I don't know, we've got a big field at the back of where we live, and so cutting the grass and keeping the garden going, walking the dogs mainly, but I don't have time for hobbies.
Bit of a countryman?
Yeah, I think in another life I'd probably been a farmer, but or a chef, one of the two. So the 2 other things I've taken an interest in.
What did you think you could achieve and bring to the sport? When you came here to the GBGB, what did you think you could add to it?
Well, don't forget, I mean, I started off as a Director of Regulation, so they wanted someone who could oversee the licensing of the tracks, obviously registrations, and obviously the harder edge of that, which is obviously about disciplinaries, dealing with people who obviously are in breach of the rules. So obviously I took over from Declan, which some people will remember, who himself was an ex-senior cop as well. I don't know, it was one of those things. I believe in the rule of law, and I also think that people should be fair and even-handed around what we do. And I think even though I've been here 4 years and I've still got that Director of Regulation role, there are things that I think we need to do within the disciplinary committee, which is where we're sat now in the boardroom, that would make things in some ways easier for trainers and people who are in breach of the rules, but clearer in terms of, I mean, we spoke earlier about 3 strikes and you're out. So people have a very clear idea about what happens when they're in breach of some of those rules. So that was the DOR side of it. I think as a Managing Director, the reason I got asked to take it on and originally said no was on the basis that we needed to be moving forward in terms of transparency and openness in what we do. Not just in terms of people thinking that we swept things under the carpet, which is not the case, but in terms of what's the direction of the Greyhound Board. Are we a commercial entity? Are we there as a regulator? Is it a combination of the two? So for me, it was about taking that direction over a period of time.
It's a really political sport, isn't it? And I know that's something you probably have to deal with every day. Why is it so political, do you think?
Well, first of all, a question about, are we any more political in terms of, say, our colleagues in horse racing? You and I might sit here and say, yes, it is, in terms of sort of a lot of the gripes that are put up, a lot of the... everyone's got a better idea than the people that actually try to do the job. And, I've said to a number of people, if you want to come and do my job, then you're more than welcome to give it a go. But I think in terms of, if you look at where horse racing is at the moment, very political in terms of their assessment in terms of cruelty, using the use of the crop and things like that. Well, it's them today, it'll be us tomorrow in terms of where we are. So I think It's political because it has to be, because again we rely on government to support what we're doing within greyhound racing as much as horse racing does as well. So it's political, small p for me.
Do you think it's particularly because there's animals at the centre of it, like with horse racing?
Yeah, we know we've got our critics out there, and those people are completely opposed to greyhound racing. And for them, it's always been about the abuse of animals and the fact that they're made to run. They're there as a betting commodity and a product. What we've got to try and do as a sport is to reverse those claims, and that these dogs aren't commodities. They are sentient beings. They are loved by people who are in the sport.
We touched on you as a person. Does it bother you when you get a lot of criticism, or the sport gets a lot of criticism?
See, this is very thick skin. Okay, so no, I've even in my previous role and my previous career, there's always been people who, for whatever motivation, whatever ambitions they've got, try to hinder in what you're trying to do. I know that what we're trying to do at the Greyhound Board, and that with the support of the people involved in the sport, we're trying to do the right thing. And that's the right thing in terms of the sport, but it's especially the right thing in terms of the dogs that are employed within the sport.
And I think it's fair of me to say that discipline and regulation, and in terms of drugs and things like that, is something that the GBGB have done really well.
Yeah, even before I came into the role, the whole idea about the integrity of the betting product, but more especially around the safety and welfare of the dogs around that. Because don't forget, if you want to slow a dog or make it go faster, you can do that, but it's also about the toxicity of what that does to the dog. So the welfare angle has always been as much there as it is around integrity.
A bit of good news recently with the news that Towcester is set to reopen. How big a boost do you think that is going to be for the sport?
Well, is it going to reopen? That's probably the million-dollar question. We've had, obviously, 2 people have shown an interest to the Greyhound Board that they want to reopen Towcester, and I've seen the comments made in the post recently from one of the people that are involved in that. I've had conversations with both of them. Until such time as they're able to come to us and say that they've got a proper business plan and they've got intentions to open it, then it's as much likely to open as, say, Oxford is.
Okay, interesting. What about Romford and the renovations there? Have you been? It's
no,
fantastic.
I'd arranged to go and see Ian there. I think it was the week leading up to the opening, but to be fair to Ian, that was probably the wrong time to have gone. So I go there, some of the staff have been there, they think it's fantastic. Again, that's a real plus for the sport that, Ladbrokes Coral are investing that amount of money into the infrastructure, which is great.
Definitely recommend a night there. Talk to me about the media rights deal. Do you see an end to it, and how involved do you get?
I reverse that back, so we're not involved in it at all, other than when SIS decided they were going to take their contracts out with a number of the tracks. We had some obvious concerns because there was an increase in the amount of races that were going to be going on. So again, it was about me going to speak to their CEO to make sure that, and get assurances from them that they weren't going to be overrunning dogs, and we've seen no evidence of that. And again, our snipes that are on the ground will be monitoring how many times the dog is running in on any particular week. And I'm pleased to see that SIS are providing us with reports of all their runs and the dogs and the strike rate. It is a big thing. I think greyhound racing is stuck in the middle of all of this. You've got the promoters are obviously selling their content. They're selling it to the 2 companies who are arch rivals. We've heard anecdotally that they both want to put each other out of business. That's not our actual concern. My concern, and that of the Greyhound Board, is the fact that you've got collateral damage in all of this. So there are some positives of it. You've got certain tracks and certain trainers are now getting much more in the way of prize money and run money. That's great to see. And perhaps some of those tracks are the ones that were living far more hand to mouth prior to SIS coming along. Similarly, you've got ARC, as you know, quite recently have just said they have taken over Bellevue and Perry Bar, and that's added to their stable of Newcastle and Sunderland. I suppose my point that I'd impress upon them is, sooner or later, contracts are going to come up. Long before that happens, I'd like to see the 2 of them start to have far more detailed talks about how they can both work within the industry and make it fair for all.
Kind of feels sometimes like everybody wants to take what they can out of it, and people aren't working together for a sustainable future. Would that be fair?
Well, as I said, because you've got 2 companies that are, they're in it to try and do the other one out, seemingly, there's going to be collateral damage on that. And we're not out of the woods in terms of whether or not tracks will survive. I mean, we refer to it as a war. I think that's our terminology, not the companies. But if it is a war, then there will be casualties. And from our point of view, the one thing that we don't want to do, and that's why we're always willing to talk to either of the companies, and we do, is about making sure that we aren't going to lose some of these tracks.
Would you get involved in trying to find a resolution between the two of them?
I don't think either company would want a mediated aspect on this. I think they're both mature enough to come together and have those conversations about how they want to carve up things. But as I said, for us, it's always about what's stuck in the middle, and for us, we're talking about greyhounds again.
Is it sustainable, do you think, the way things are?
There's nothing out there that tells me that it isn't sustainable. We know that, talking to those two media companies, they've got more than enough content. But a lot of that content doesn't just come from the UK, it comes from other places, including Ireland as well.